Right, so welcome back to the Collecting Track panels. Before I introduce the next speaker, I want to cover a couple things, just if this is the first panel you're attending. So we have a social room down the hall where collectors have already been taking advantage of opportunities to meet other collectors, do trades. There's a lot of meet and greets scheduled there. There's a lot of patch trading and pin trading and swag trading. In fact, we have 2 display cases of swag, just collector swag that collectors have put together. And what we decided to do is do an auction of swag, so that basically, some of the best of from Celebration, if you wanted to bid on it, all the funds were going to go to charity. They're going to go to Rancho Obi-Wan. And so do stop by the social area after the panel if you're interested in that. And in fact, after every panel, we have our panelists go over to that room to field questions. So if you want to engage with the speakers and you have detailed questions, it's an opportunity to go meet the speakers. So today we've been very focused on vintage toys. That's been sort of the theme throughout the panels today. And I'm very excited about our next topic. Dave Tree is one of the world's leading experts on the Palitoy Toy Company and some of the really unique Star Wars toys that came out of the UK. So please give a round of applause for Dave Tree.
I wouldn't go that far. Thank you, Gus. And good morning, class. I've always wanted to say that. No, thanks for coming. It's my first time to Chicago, and I'm super excited. This is actually my first stateside celebration, so it's super great. So if I never interacted with any of you before, as Gus said, you can field questions to me in the social room after the panel, and then also you'll be able to find me on the Fanthatrax booth in the main hall as well. So if you don't get that opportunity because you want to catch the next one, you can always come and get questions there. So today we are looking at the effect and influence of Palitoy on Star Wars toys. Now, just to kind of just help me out so I can adjust accordingly, can I get a show of hands of people in here who are from the UK? Okay, and then from Europe? All right, and then from the United States and Canada? Oh, what a surprise. And then from anywhere else in the world as well, please. Okay, no, that's cool. All right, so the majority of folk here are not from the UK, so that makes things a lot easier to start with. Palitoy was a company based in the UK, and they were the guys who were responsible for actually producing and retailing, or distributing, I should say, the Star Wars toys for the UK market. The most notable thing with them is that they are slightly different to the vintage toys that most people are associated with the Kenner line. And today we'll be going through and looking at and exploring as to why that there are some of those differences there. So effectively, in the beginning, there was a chap called Alfred, and he was the person who literally brought Palitoy together. But it wasn't always called that. It was called the Palitoy Company. And in 1919, he started developing and making celluloid products. Now, these were things from little ducks and windmills and things like that. But later on, they then developed the British Xylonite Company, which was very specifically the toy division. And then from there, experimenting with plastics. I mean, we take it all for granted today because things are so developed, but back then it was a new material, new source. So they were literally experimenting and developing these things, which might not necessarily by today's standards be safe for kids to actually use, but a lot of it was dolls that were being made. But later on, because of the success of what they were doing, they drew attention and then were acquired by General Mills. Now, General Mills were the guys who owned Kenner at that point in time, who distributed Star Wars toys. So effectively, they were looking to acquire a portfolio of toy companies from around the world to effectively have a distribution network set up. So not necessarily they're all incumbent doing their own thing, just set up a network so we have something here that then can be sold here, here, and here. And if you think, best way to think about it is a monopoly board. As you're going around, you're trying to get all the closure on that. Same sort of thing, but in a toy way. So by 1980, General Mills actually acquired a few more toy companies as well. That included Dennis Fisher. Now, Dennis Fisher is mostly best known for the spirograph. I don't know if there's any engineering enthusiasts out there, but it was the most frustrating toy as a kid, using cogs and dials, and you make like these amazing patterns, but like you make one mistake, and that's it. You got to start again. It was, it was brutal to actually play. But there was also the Chad Valley Company, which is still in existence today, that focused pretty much on preschool toys. At its height, in 1983, so we're talking around about the time of like Return of the Jedi coming out, Palitoy owned over 15% of the overall UK toy market, and it was the best-selling boys' toys with Star Wars, Action Man, and Action Force. Now, those last two brands people might not necessarily be familiar with, like, what's Action Man and Action Force? So, effectively, Action Man was the UK version of G.I. Joe, and it went down like gangbusters. It actually was the toy of the decade in the 1970s, which for anyone who's outside of like Star Wars here, G.I. Joe only sold for a very specific amount of time in the States. It actually stopped, but like in the UK, it carried on, and they did a lot of product development, bringing new innovations and things to the actual line. Fundamentally, one thing to like sort of like note there, this was an agreement with Hasbro. So Hasbro over here would have been one of the biggest direct rivals to Kenner, but Kenner worked directly with Palitoy. So it was like, well, hang on a second, is there like a conflict of interest like that's going on? So as mentioned, it was the best-selling toy over the decade. And they looked at developing and bringing new innovation through that was outside and beyond the actual like G.I. Joe line. So a lot of these things were like created using UK-specific military units. So everything was going great for Palitoy until Star Wars. So effectively, to like set this up, what they needed to do was look at who's going to be distributing what from like General Mills' perspective. They've effectively got like two main front runners, one of them being Palitoy, the other one like being Dennis Fisher. The third one that I mentioned earlier was acquired later on, well into the line of like Star Wars. So it was deciding over who was gonna get the chance to distribute first. Now the expectation was actually set originally for Dennis Fisher to sell the toy lines because they distributed $6 Million Man. They had like scaled up accordingly, and they were big in that aspect. Palitoy was also big, but they had Action Man. So like the original discussions were very much centered around Dennis Fisher like taking it on because they needed something to replace like $6 Million Man. However, this is where things started getting very, very different compared to what we know and see like within the Kenner line. UK at that point in time was very, very different. It's difficult to appreciate with like globalization now and like the internet and how things are so easy. But like back then, we really only had one TV station that literally did commercials. So it was very much narrow and very expensive as a result. However, compared to the States, our comic books were produced on a weekly basis rather than on a monthly basis. So you could get your message out in other ways and like change it very quickly as well. And the majority of toy retailers were small independent single stores. And when I say that, I mean literally small, dingy, dark, little toy shops, dusty. So I run a toy shop over in the UK. If you ever come over, it's literally that because you can't find anything and you're tripping over stuff. But that made up the majority of the toy retail market in the United Kingdom. And that's quite significant. So when Star Wars was being promoted to the retailers, it was unproven. We now live, I mean, we're all here for this one reason, but like back then, it's like, what is this? And it was very difficult for them to communicate, like, well, we think this is going to be huge. We think this is going to be great. You kind of like need to like, you know, take a punt, so to speak. On this slide here, we can actually see like the prices, and this was the first solicitation that went out to all the independent retailers, and they could only really accurately say, we're gonna like, this is the price point of one item. Everything else was kind of like, we really don't know. You know, we're trying to like get an idea from you guys, you know, what it is that you want to like commit to, and really the answer was, well, not a lot. We really don't know what we're dealing with here, and like some of these items are really expensive. You know, you can't expect me to stock this stuff when I don't know how it's going to go. So this was at the main point where Palitoy started to differentiate from like the Kenner products. They wanted to like look at ways to like make the products cheaper for the retailers. A lot of questions I always get is, you know, why were Palitoy products fundamentally different? And it is not for any other reason than to like try and accommodate for the retailer, to get them on board, to get them to stock the stuff, and then hope it's going to be a big hit for them to keep on ordering. So some of the things that they were like doing was working to a budget, and this included stripping out electronics. So we got the X-Wing here. Everyone's very familiar with it, hopefully. But in the UK, our X-Wing fighter never had any like electronics in it. If you strip that out, you could make the product cheaper to then sell to the retailers. In other ways, by not using plastics, Palitoy was very, very au fait with using vacuum forming, which is a technique of using plastic sheets over a mold, a jig, and using a suction cup after heating up the plastic, and it forms a shape. They were doing this for like the dolls that I mentioned earlier and Action Man, so they looked at substituting materials to make things cheaper. And this included a couple of different sets, and also reducing part count. So where I mentioned earlier, the X-Wing having electronics, if you made things having fewer parts, you could make the item cheaper for the retailer to then stock it. So on the land speeder over here, you could pop the hood and look inside the engine. In the UK, it was a solid piece. You couldn't actually like open it up. But the biggest thing was literally taking items out altogether. So for our release, we never had the Millennium Falcon. It wasn't until the Empire Strikes Back came along that we actually had the Millennium Falcon available to buy. It was just deemed too expensive for the retailer to stock. So to kind of combat that, if you're reducing things, how can you flesh it out? Is there anything we can do to like kind of make things appear bigger than they actually are? And one of the ways to do that is using their skills that they've got available in-house to make other products that are compatible with it. Most famous of those being the cardboard Death Star, which is a beautiful piece. Literally a little playset that's made out of cardboard that is all flat packed, so you know all IKEA fans would love it. And then you could like literally like pop it together, and then you create this thing, and it's great. It was supposed to withstand the weight of a small child. Hand on heart, probably not really. But it was such a great playset to have. And was also the very thing that was focused on the very first TV advert that like Palitoy created. You know, so it was their kind of like flagship in place of the Millennium Falcon.
The year is 1978, and Palitoy bring you Star Wars. Here on Death Star, Ben Kenobi combats the awesome power of Darth Vader, while Han and Leia battle for their lives in the trash compactor. Luke evades the stormtroopers with R2, D2, and C-3PO. But can he escape in the X-Wing fighter? Only you will know. Only you can create your own Star Wars. Death Star, vehicles, figures, all sold separately. May the Force be with you.
So there we go. And that gives you a little bit of an insight into kind of like how British toy advertising is very twee, like, oh, but like the TV adverts are significant because, like I said, we had one commercial TV station that allowed you to do this. So like the slots were at a premium because we're talking millions of people were, you know, when you're cutting down the available number of channels, any TV show is getting millions of people to watching it. So the imprint that you were getting from the effect of that advertising was quite significant. But it then also meant that if you only had one person who was charging those rates, they were like crazy. If you could get a slot. So within here, I don't know if you can quite make out, but the Death Star sold for around £8.25. So by today's standards, that's around about $14 or so. No, probably even cheaper than that, about $12. And the action figures, 99p, so $1.20, $1.30 to £6, so around about $8. And that would probably be for your X-Wing there. It was a massive hit. You know, it was so successful. And it proved itself immeasurably. And like, it was a very difficult to like keep up with the demand, but it opened up the floodgates. What can you do to get more product in? What can we, you know, we want it, we want more, you know, keep getting this stuff in. But then that was also happening globally with everywhere. So like the availability of stuff, because Palitoy were working to budgets, you couldn't necessarily get stuff like made by someone else. You were having to like make compromises all the time and like, you know, robbing Peter to pay Paul, so to speak, and like trying to shuffle around like stocks of this stuff to like be able to like fulfill the demand. But the other way to like effectively get the message out there was actually the British comics. So where you had the weekly issues coming out, you could like literally, and when I say weekly comics, we're not talking a few titles. There were like dozens and dozens of these things. So you could carpet bomb, so to speak, with like very specific messages. So Palitoy took the advantage of that and created a series of really quite amazing graphically comic book adverts to sell the toys. And it wasn't like compared to say some of the US based adverts of like, you know, here is a representation of the toy. We had like action sequences, like this amazing picture by an artist called Brian Bolland, who went on to do amazing things within the comic book industry for like Darth Vader's TIE Fighter. So it was like the sizzle, not the sausage. You know, it's not like here's the toy, like this is the adventures you can create with it. You had like a lot of other great ones done. This is another advert to like introduce new characters. So this is almost like wave 2, so to speak. And this one's quite significant because on here, I don't know if you can just see at the back, but you've got Green Greedo, which was the reference for the character Greedo. I don't know how that got in there or why. Nobody's ever really given me a solid answer on that front. But there are a lot of UK collectors who when they talk, they do sometimes refer to Greedo as like Green Greedo. I don't know if Lee Bullock's in here. No, he's one of them. And then you had some awesome other adverts as you moved into like other areas. So this one was like the release advert for like The Empire Strikes Back, and is literally a comic book format, like detailing like all the new toys that were coming out. But Palitoy then wanted to kind of like kick things up a notch, following on what was going on stateside. And that was like looking at the release of mail-away concepts, so direct-to-consumer channel of can we like utilize this as an actual marketing initiative to like both promote the line, new film, and like get people to like buy more product. First one of these was like Boba Fett, and he's iconic, but like again using like a very, very different style of like advertising here. This a beautiful airbrush of the action figure, and then you got like all these details on there saying all like his cool equipment. Doesn't really tell you who he is, but you know he's going to be like really, really cool. But to like back that up,
Palitoy present Star Wars toys. The princess has been captured. Our heroes are on their way. But who is this mysterious figure? Boba Fett! Will he save Princess Leia or side with Darth Vader? See comics and toy shops for details of Boba Fett's special offer now. He's waiting.
Darth Vader. So, for any eagle-eyed people in here at the moment, this end shot here, I don't know if that's you can quite make out. But that's not actually the 3 3/4 inch action figure. That's a 12-inch action figure that's been repainted to look like the 3 3/4 action figure. For those who are not familiar, the 12-inch one isn't blue like that. He's kind of like got a green color twinge to him. But they did this for like the close-up. So if we've got anybody who's like a member of the Advertising Standards Authority, you could like kick off now because this is misleading advertising, arguably. But that was just like the first one, and it was very, very successful and like predominantly advertised through toy shops and like comic books. But that would like then open them up to like do lots more, and we had lots of new ones come in the form of like Dengar. The popularity of like the Bounty Hunters and then the Empire Strikes Back, everybody was like hot on it. But Palitoy then took that and then combined it with something that they did already with like Action Man. Now, Action Man had a marketing initiative, the direct-to-consumer channel, of like packing in leaflets with their toys, and then on the packaging itself, you had like stars. So you could cut out the stars, clip them to the little pamphlet, and then the more stars you got, the cooler the item. So the most stars you could get like an Action Man, so a G.I. Joe, or like a tent set, the Canadian Mountie with like the Husky. Palitoy thought, well, we can do that with the Star Wars brand as well, and we use the Bounty Hunter as a gimmick to say, we're tracking down these cool items, and we're going to get you to like hunt them down and cut out their nameplates and like stick them in and redeem them. Within that, following very sort of similar closely to the mail-away premiums that you had in the United States, you had like things like the Survival Kit and the Darth Vader carry case, but you also like had Dengar as well. This was all going absolutely brilliant, and like the success of like Star Wars toys just literally convinced everyone from like Palitoy itself to like distribution channels who were selling toys on behalf of Palitoy and the retailers that we need to get as much like products in there as possible. We don't need to like make any more tweaks. We don't need to like cost engineer things out. So we got the Falcon. But like from that point onwards, Empire Strikes Back, there was very little done that was like unique. Everything was like more or less the same as like the can of products. But it also then meant more product support. So working on point of sale displays, having like booths and things in toy shops, end caps and other promotions. Increasing on like TV advertising. And like putting more muscle in the production. So you'd think that this would be all really good, and everybody's like really, really happy. But unfortunately, General Mills was looking at restructuring quite early on in the 80s, and that led to a mass load of redundancies at Palitoy, which at a local level went down like a lead balloon because Palitoy had a coal mining industry previous to that, which in the early 80s had been fought with a lot of shutdowns from like the government, either privatizing the coal pits or just like closing them off because they weren't really profitable. It caused mass unemployment. So there was a lot of resentment the moment that this happened because it was like taking up the slack of that employment and then letting them down again. Almost 450 jobs were lost as resources were kind of like consolidated and relocated, despite like phenomenal sales. Further problems were like created as well, in the sense of where I mentioned Action Man earlier. Action Man was the flagship toy product for Palitoy, and now they've got Star Wars, which is doing well, and it was like overtaking, but like what it almost did was like sink Action Man's sales in a very short space of time. Now, I'm sure you can all relate, or any parents can relate to this. If you got like something that this big, that's your action figure, and then you got something this big, you can get an awful lot more for your money at that scale. And Palitoy thought, well, this is no good. This is absolutely killing what we're doing with Action Man. We need to do the same thing with Action Man. So what they then did was effectively create Star Wars style articulation, so 5-point articulation, head, shoulders, and like your limbs, to create 3 3/4 inch action men and rebrand it as a new brand line called Action Force.
Come to review your Action Force, Commander.
Yes, I have.
How many will Sir be requiring for his mission?
Well, I am short of 1 British Marine.
Will he be needing transport? Brum! Or will you base him at HQ? Good luck, sir. I expect we'll be seeing you again.
Yes, and take charge of the rest of the men till I return, Sergeant!
Yes, sir!
Action Man presents new Action Force minifigures.
So where I mentioned earlier about the toy shops, that is pretty much a good representation of like the toy shops in the UK in the early 80s. Very kind of like very small rinky-dink kind of thing. But this is quite significant. Whilst it's not necessarily Star Wars, there was a lot of crossover involved. In this end shot here, you can see this cardboard structure. It is a reworking of the cardboard Death Star that we saw earlier. And it is the same blueprint, slightly modified in terms of its shape and design, but like literally it's almost the same parts that are like used, or same design parts used to make its creation. Action Force would share the same shelf space as Star Wars, and they would be quite keen to actually make sure that, you know, we want to kind of like win back some of like those sales that we're like losing. So we're going to like partner it in terms of like its marketing and things like that. But it wasn't just at a marketing level that it was sharing things with like Star Wars. There are a few other like little under the radar things going on that most people don't realize. This is the satellite defense. Now, it's a skidoo that uses parts of G.I. Joe, and any fans in here, you'll see that you've got the vamp cannon at the front and also the instrumentation panel at the back. But on the underside of it, you've actually got the Millennium Falcon radar dish. I don't think that that was probably intended from either Hasbro's side of things or Kenner's side of things. This is the Sea Lion. This is my favorite vehicle ever. It's a 2-man submarine. It's just the most beautiful design toy. But in the middle there, that's the Scout Walker hatch. It didn't end there either. They were doing things, there were a couple of other Action Force products that used little nods, niches and bits and pieces in there that you will find from like Star Wars toys. So the Robo Skull is effectively a TIE fighter, but instead of a cockpit, it's a giant red skull. It's the stuff of nightmares, but it looks like a TIE fighter, and the pilot even is like almost like a TIE fighter pilot as well. But the guns coming out of the eyeballs of the Red Skull are the same as the Millennium Falcon's quad guns. But in some cases, they didn't even bother, to like hide it. They were actually packing the action figures, with Star Wars weapons, and in particular in Germany, they were substitute all of the accessories with Star Wars weapons because there was a lot of concern about how weapons or military themes would like go down with like a young generation in Germany. So they packaged it with Star Wars weapons, so it was like seen as stun or like sci-fi weapons and things like that. Again, this is a Kenner product that's using Hasbro product then in a European market. They didn't know this was going on. I did this presentation or a similar one for G.I. Joe Con a couple of years ago, and I had like effectively the principal of design from G.I. Joe come up and go, "What?" Like I didn't know any of this was going on. But there we go. Return to Star Wars toys, please. But by the time of Return of the Jedi, sales of Star Wars toys had hit $50,000. No, $50 million. Oh. I'm tired. And it was, just going absolutely amazing. But like more internal changes were going on. There was like more restructuring of what was going on within General Mills. Now, I mentioned earlier, they acquired lots of toy companies globally, and this is all across Europe. So rather than thinking, well, in each of your domestic markets, we will have you like distribute toys with your own badge, we can now, perhaps make one solution that fits all. So we created multilingual packaging. So that product can just be one thing, and then shipped out to a number of different distribution channels through there. The advertising and marketing became a little bit more vanilla, if I'm honest. It wasn't as brave, and it was all starting to follow the brand guidelines that were being set. In the earlier years of Star Wars, there wasn't really that kind of defined thing, and that's why you find some really crazy stuff, which is why we're all here at the collecting panel to get to learn. But by this point, everything was established. You got to use this particular type font. You got to use this particular logo, and it's all set full regulations and stuff like that. There were a few things that we still did that was kind of unique. Again, the stuff of nightmares for kids. You could go meet Darth Vader in your toy shop. And that was a very, very popular marketing program. So interacting directly with the consumer. They had a tour that took place of a Darth Vader. And he was an actor that was outside employed to fit the costume, so it wasn't like Dave Prowse himself, but he would go out and he would actually sign little cards for people and things like that. They had other costumes as well, so they had Stormtrooper and a really cool, unique Boba Fett one, but they were always the Palitoy employees, predominantly from the marketing department that fulfilled those roles. So there we go. And the thing I love about this, again, talking about those toy shops, nobody uses those vinyl draped curtains at the back there at that door, where the guy's walking in, literally it's wow. The other cool thing that Palitoy did towards the end of its life, they created a very cool installation called the Command Satellite. Now, again, this was a tour. You can see on here the tour dates where it went round. But this was a super premium and completely unlike any other toy marketing interactive thing for its time that was being done for anybody else. This was the pinnacle of it. So here we can see the entrance to the structure, and you're walking in, and then inside there'd be TV screens playing the adverts and toy displays and things like that. So a nice little shot there of some of the toy displays that were inside. However, all things good things must come to an end, and as there was no confirmed at that point in time more Star Wars films, Palitoy had built itself up as a machine to fulfill this demand, and then nothing to keep it going. Action Force was very, very popular, but it wasn't enough to kind of keep everything going, and it was then going to start bringing into question what can you actually do within this. Despite selling over 25 million Star Wars action figures, it kind of almost led to the collapse of Palitoy, because there was nothing really there to be able to keep it sustained. So what do? Do you start laying everybody off, or can we find something? And unfortunately, it did end up with that. However, it's not all bad. We're all here for a reason. We all like to reminisce. I'm a dinosaur, and I'll wax lyrical about this all day. But it gives us all common ground to talk and interact. And most recently, Palitoy was given a plaque in its former factory site in 2007. So it was granted a heritage status to commemorate the production of it. It's not quite as cool and as big as the Kenner Muriel, but it's something at least. It's a start. But through all of this, we get to share and interact. So it's absolutely fantastic. And I thank you all for being here with us. But I'm not going to let you leave without doing a little bit of homework. Now, you have at you, it's never been a better time for you to learn more about this stuff. And you've got a phenomenal range of resources. I mean, by here today, hopefully some of you might have learned something, but you've also got some great online resources, the Star Wars Collectors Archive, trilogo.info, Fantha Tracks, Star Wars Forum UK, the Vintage Rebellion podcast, the Kivecast podcast, and Farthest From, which is a show that we do over in the UK. And to really expand your horizons, look beyond just necessarily always Star Wars. You've got like a lot of social media as well, with like the Palitoy Archive, the Star Wars Palitoy Collector, and Collecting Star Wars Beyond the Toys is a great group because it kind of looks at a lot of things, not just about the actual toys, but you get a lot of crossover, particularly with like the British stuff at that there. Talking to other people is the best way to like learn, and if you can walk away with this with one thing to remember, is no one has all the answers. So the more people you talk to, the more you get to like, you know, build a balance and understanding of stuff. So thank you very much. I don't know if we got time for questions in here, or do we go to the other room? Yeah, okay. Any questions? Yes, sir. I can. I don't actually have any pictures here on this presentation, but if you come and grab us afterwards in the social room, I'll be able to like call it up on my phone for you to see. It is literally so instead of the cockpit of the TIE fighter, it's a red skull with wings that oscillate, and the viewing window is very similar to the TIE fighter window. But it's got a back gunner as well, so they were thinking ahead from like the Force Awakens with like, the two-man cockpit TIE fighter. But then there's an underneath bit as well for you to capture a prisoner. But the pilot for it of the Robo Skull is a guy called Red Wolf, and he literally looks exactly like a TIE fighter pilot. There's no denying the influence that Star Wars had on that particular toy vehicle, but it is really, really cool. Yes, sir?
Yeah, the satellite command center, is that what it's called?
Yes.
Do you know if any collector actually got the hands on one, or was it lost?
To my knowledge, no one person's got the full thing. There is someone who does have a few bits and pieces and parts of it, and they are hoping at some point to be able to cobble together and try and recreate something out of those pieces. The difficulty with it is getting reference images to actually like sort of see, and also the TV sets as well, because we're talking chunky CRT TV sets with like a VHS video recorder like bolted underneath. I mean, now everything's on a pen stick or even like streams, but like, you know, how to like put all these together. You can kind of do like a best fit, but there's no one who's got the full thing to my knowledge. Yes, sir.
How is it that Dennis Fisher and Palitoy both have the vintage 12-inch line?
That's a very good question. So where I mentioned earlier that Dennis Fisher were expecting to distribute the full toy line, it was considered that they needed something to fill the void. And where had been previously distributing $6 Million Man, and then also Muton and Cyborg, which were kind of like sort of 8-inch Mego style figures. It was felt that they would be the best ones or best ones to market the larger size action figures. Now that didn't last for long, and they didn't even get like the full range anyway. Come like Empire Strikes Back, some of them were rebranded and redistributed as Palitoy ones, but the 12-inch line as a whole wasn't very successful in the UK at all. One of those reasons really is because of Action Man. Because of the amount of articulation in that as a selling product, which you didn't have here at a retail level in the United States. You had other sort of like 12-inch things, but not like your original like G.I. Joe. It kind of didn't work. You know, it was seen as not as good value for money compared to Action Man, because you could buy Action Man, the doll, and like super articulated, but then for your pocket money, you can then buy him an outfit and all these other accessories as well. So it was a much better proposition.
Here with Ken Mike for the 12-inch, 12-inch difference up here.
Right, okay. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Palitoy also had Mego in the UK. Was there an impact or influence between the two lines over there?
Not really. Mego was the Palitoy distributed Mego figures were probably more popular before the launch like Star Wars. So for us, they kind of like came out round about early 70s and really kind of like sort of carried through to around about 1978. After that, they didn't really feature in the distribution by Palitoy at all. They kind of like just, you know, decided that it wasn't really working out for them. So they kind of like pulled the plug on it. But Palitoy would work with a lot of different international companies. So Hasbro being one of them, clearly with like Action Man, even though it's a direct competitor to Kenner, whilst being owned by General Mills. But you also had a lot of Tomy products being distributed by Palitoy as well, from like handheld, like Pocketeers, the little spring action handheld games and things like that, and like Mego. So Palitoy was kind of very much focused on rebadging other people's products under their own remit, but like made by someone else. Anybody else? At the back.
Did that 12-inch Boba Fett even like the were when it was out?
Again, not to my knowledge. That's not to say it didn't survive or exist out there. I've got several pictures of it, like black and white pictures, outside of that advert. It was used in advertising a couple of competitions as well. But I have yet to have seen that one ever kind of like surface anywhere. I hope it's out there, because it's dead cool, and I'm amazed no one's made a custom of it. Just to like, you know, it's a really easy one to do, but as of yet, nothing, I'm afraid. Anyone else? Sir.
What do you feel about the survivability of Palitoy? I mean, you know, proportionally to the Kenner line in the U.S. is a lot less product, but overseas, do you see more Palitoy product at what?
I wish. Yeah, so to kind of like put it into perspective, the UK is a lot smaller. So you're only going to be making what you need for your domestic market. And you don't need to kind of like farm this stuff like everywhere else. So the relative numbers are far lower in production. You know, we're talking crazy numbers in terms of what's sold, which is great. But that's what's sold, and kids are ripping off the cards. You know, you don't keep this stuff. So the amount of things that have survived intact are far less, and it's not necessarily easier to be able to like pick up these things, especially now like the way the communication works. You know, we're a global family, so you can like get all this stuff pretty, well, relatively speaking, relatively easy. It doesn't make it necessarily any easier depending on where you are in the world for it. Anyone else?
If there's any other questions, Dave, if you have a few minutes, you can go down to the
Sure.
lounge if you want to talk to Dave about a few things. First of all, big hand for our presenter today. Thank you so much.